Hi, welcome back. Today we are continuing our series on exposure therapy. We already talked about target selection, about how to set up a basic exposure, and today we are talking everything about metaphors and other tools to motivate and educate your client. And it is part of a longer series. I think I'm going to make around 5 or 6 videos and maybe add some more in the future that can actually be an easy way of freshen up your knowledge, or if you're starting with a therapist to get into it. And today we are talking about metaphors and other tools. And I think this is an important part of the delivery of exposure therapy, because even though we as therapists might understand what exposure therapy is, how it actually works on a brain level and a behavioral and a cognitive level, it might not be so easy for clients if you are the first therapist they actually see. And these metaphors can help you. So if you ask me, what do an umbrella, an armor, dogs, and a football field have in common? It is that they can all be used in the explanation of exposure therapy. So the first one we're actually going to talk about is the road metaphor. And I think I use this in all my exposure trajectories that I do with clients. And for several reasons. First of all, it is a great way at the start of the treatment to explain how exposure therapy actually works. Secondly, it is an easy way throughout the trajectory to monitor and to motivate clients. And thirdly, at the end, it is also an easy way to explain the risks of relapse. So the idea of the road metaphor is that we want to explain what safety learning is. And safety learning is like the current scientific paradigm of how therapists and scientific practitioners look at how exposure therapy actually works. It means that by now a client has a lot of associations with a conditioned stimuli towards unsafety. And within exposure, you want to build new pathways, namely you have the same conditioned stimuli and you want to attach them to safety. And how can roads actually visualize this phenomena? Often I explain that the left part, so you can see it here, that is the pathway that there is now. We call that the unsafe pathway. By now, a client often has avoided this conditioned stimuli for a long time. They have a lot of negative associations with it. Otherwise, they would probably not come to you for help within therapy. So you can actually make a drawing by saying, hey, this is like the conditioned stimuli, and you start making all these connections to the danger. And if you do that, you're going to see it looks like a road, almost like a broad highway. This is how the pathway works right now. And because of all these lines, it is very fast, it is very automatized. Your brain can go very fast in that pathway, comparable to a highway. Then we have the new pathway. That is what we're going to use within exposure therapy. So we're going to do the same conditioned stimuli, but because you're going to do exposures, new associations will be formed that are linked around safety and self-confidence in being able to handle whatever comes up within the exposure. But as you can see now, we might gonna draw a very small line. That is the first exposure. You coming to therapy or talking about it. And you can compare this to like a small road in, I would say, the rural part of your country, or like, as you can see here, it is often with a lot of turns. It is not very great when a passenger comes by. You can't drive there very fast. You have to be on the lookout a lot, like where am I? Where am I going? There are not a lot of signs. So in the beginning, this can actually cause a lot of energy. It takes your attention and it can be quite hard. However, and this is the great part of exposure therapy, is that because of neural flexibility, we can make new associations. And each time you as a client do the exposure, these new pathways can come. And it can even be easy to have this image somewhere around your office and to actually show it to your clients, is that you can see like the build up of the broadening of the road. And that is what we're going to do with exposure therapy. We're going to build up that new neural pathway in your brain as the most broad highway. And another great part of exposure therapy is that when that pathway pathway becomes larger, stronger, broader than the unsafe pathway, it will automatically choose that pathway. So then it probably is very easy for you to go to these conditioned stimuli. And if you explain it like this, you explain to your clients in safety learning and inhibitory learning, without necessarily having to use these concepts that might be quite hard to understand for people without a psychology degree. And another way of how this can actually be helpful is I use it throughout the trajectory as a motivator. So you can actually ask clients alongside the therapy or when they are struggling with their motivation, like, hey, how broad is your road now? Or how can we build this again? Or if they have done something, you can literally make them like draw a line. Some clients want to buy things that actually visualize it that way. And at the end of treatment, I find this also an easy way of explaining the risks of relapse. Of course, you want your clients to feel empowered. At the same time, it is also important to give honest psychoeducation. And we know with most mental health conditions, there is a risk of relapse. And that is because that new pathway, the new roadway you built, didn't erase the old one. So it is not built on top of it. It is built besides it. And that means that when something triggering happens, or like the pathway, that old unsafe pathway is still in your brain. So that is often what we see with relapse, that pathway suddenly becomes active again. And by explaining it like this, clients often also understand when they relapse what is happening and how they can actually come out of that again as well. So I find this one of the easiest metaphors to include in therapy, because you can actually use them at the start, throughout the trajectory, and at the end. The second metaphor is easy to use when you want to explain safety behaviors towards your clients. So we have the umbrella and the armor. I would advise to use the armor if you are treating a client that is actually healing from trauma or has been in life-threatening situations before. And the umbrella is easy to use for the rest. So what you want to use, how you want to do this is you ask your client, imagine you have a neighbor. And every time that neighbor goes outside, he's holding up his umbrella. Doesn't matter what the weather is, doesn't matter other circumstances, he's always up with his umbrella. What do you think of that? And you typically get one of these two responses. The first group will say that it's a bit weird, that they would find it a bit weird or unnecessary. And the other group would say that might be actually quite smart, because at least whatever weather he will be facing, he can have dry clothes. And your reaction depends. So in the first group, you're gonna ask, okay, yeah, I can understand that, but why would he do that? And then they often come with reasoning that it is to brace themselves for the weather. In the other group, you want to point out, okay, makes sense. However, are there also negatives to this strategy? How about his arm? Don't you think that would get very tired if he has to hold it up the whole time? And eventually the point you want to make is that, like with safety behaviors, that neighbor obviously overestimates the likelihood of something that will happen. In this case, the rain. On the other hand, the neighbor also overestimates how horrible it would be, like how horrible the disaster actually is, because it is not that great to get wet. On the other hand, if your clothes are wet, you can go home, you can change, and it is not a life-threatening situation. And often you can make then the metaphor to their own safety behaviors, like what are you doing that is actually not necessary, where you are actually overestimating the chance that something bad will happen, or you're overestimating how awful it actually is. Because you going outside only with your anti-anxiety medication, or you only going to the supermarket on a Tuesday morning, you can compare that to the man with the umbrella. And for other people, that might be a bit excessive. And for the group who told you that they find it smart, you actually want to point out more the negatives of doing this. For example, that person might get his arm hurt, that other people might look at him weird or like treat him weird, that it is just not necessary. It might prohibit him from enjoying the weather. And the same you can do with the armor. However, with the armor, it's a bit different than an umbrella, right? Like an armor is actually heavy and you can't connect with anyone, and it is very tough to walk with that. And that is more suitable if clients really got these protective safety behaviors because they have been in unsafe situations. Like, it makes sense that you wanted to walk around with an armor like that in the house you grew up with, or in this country where there was a war, but now you're here. It is excessive. And then the armor metaphor can help. So why you want to explain safety behaviors towards your clients is because it would be so sad that you have a client who is going on all these exposures but are still holding their umbrella or going in their armor. And why is because the conclusion afterwards might be that the person was kept safe because of the umbrella or the armor. And that actually strengthens that old pathway. Remember when we talked about the roads? That is actually the road that you don't want to reinforce or build broader. You want to build that new road, and therefore it is important for clients to limit their safety behaviors. So the umbrella or the armor can help also throughout the treatment. So you can ask them, okay, remember your neighbor with the umbrella? What do you think? What are your umbrellas? What umbrellas do you think you're gonna bring to this exposure? And same with the armor. Then we have the third metaphor. This is more a sports metaphor. For some clients that might fit better than the one we just discussed until now. And that is the idea that if you picture anxiety as a person, or like the head of a game or the coach of a game, they have to come up with defense lines, right? To fight off the enemy. And often there are several defense lines. And from anxiety point of view, the first line is avoidance, to not go somewhere. The second line of defense is the safety behaviors. So, okay, if I'm going outside, I take my umbrella or use my armor. So both are lines of defense. And for clients, sometimes it can be easy to understand that, okay, often they choose for the first line of defense. They choose avoidance. But if they can't avoid, they choose for the second line of defense. And you can use that metaphor with sports or with a castle, which sometimes might be suitable for clients who game a lot. You can do it easily if you work with teenagers, or I'm a fangirl myself. So for example, if you talk about Taylor Swift and how would she protect herself with bodyguards, etc. Or you can make the comparison to Harry Potter. It doesn't really matter as long as your clients start to understand that they are trying to protect themselves with two different divisions, the division of avoidance and the division of safety behaviors. And both seem to have an effect on the short term, but are actually harmful on the long term if they want to experience more safety in their life. Then we go to the fourth metaphor, and this is actually the metaphor that is easy to use when you are starting a treatment for clients who actually fear inner stimuli. For example, with panic disorder, when there is high anxiety for all kinds of bodily sensations, when I think more with OCD, when there is also anxiety for intrusions or memories. And you do this by asking your clients to imagine for a moment that they are the therapist and that you come to them and you have an excessive fear of dogs. So I often explain this as, okay, imagine you are the therapist for a moment and I come to you and I say, I am so anxious for dogs. It started with a small dog after I saw a video on TikTok where someone had like this massive bite in their face. And now I see them everywhere. People even bring their stupid dogs to the supermarket. I can't go there anymore, to the park. And now my friends also adopted a dog. And I just can't go anywhere anymore. And I feel awful because of it. Please help me. What would you do? And clients can often come up with, I think you need to go to a dog. Maybe a small dog or a kind dog first, or a dog who's on a leash. And then eventually you are building that out and going to see more dogs. And then I ask them, but why is that? Why do I need to see dogs? I hate them. I find them scary. And clients can often easily come up with, yeah, but you can learn that dogs are actually kind or nice. Until there, most clients can come along with you on this journey. And then I often ask them also, but what if that dog actually bites me? What if that actually happens? Is then the therapy would the therapy be lost or stopped? And this is often a part where clients struggle a bit, but you can use that afterwards in the discussion. So then you reverse the roles back and you explain to them what they told you. That first of all, they're talking about exposure. They're talking about exposure in multiple contexts to learn safety with the dogs, to learn that they are actually safe. And what I tell them is that also in the worst case that this disaster actually happens, that indeed a client goes on an exposure and the dog bites them, is that's actually also okay, because they learn that the likelihood that that happens is very small, but if it happens, that they can have the coping skills to manage that. And when clients understand these concepts, I ask them, what are your dogs? What are the things that you need to face? And often they can start to see that by them, the dogs are in their body. And that is also how I explain it. With you, we are going to do the exact same thing, only now the dogs are in your brain or in your body. And we're going to expose you to these sensations or to these memories so that you can learn over time that they are actually safe and that you can handle them. And often that is an easy way, especially when you are trying to explain exposure towards inner stimuli. So all these metaphors can already motivate clients or educate them on how exposure therapy actually works. But there are also several small ways that you can use to motivate clients or that clients can use to motivate themselves. So the first is what we call a motivation board. Is at the start of treatment, it is very important clients have a clear list of what they actually want to do at the end of treatment that they don't do now because of their fears. So why are someone in treatment? What do they want to achieve? And also, are there things they are doing now because of anxiety that they don't want to do anymore at the end of treatment? Clients often come up with a list like, okay, I want to be able to visit my friend or go to the cinema, or I want to be able to enjoy my day if I visit this person, or I want to be able to run a kilometer, or I want to be able to have a conversation, talk about my interest. I want to be able to take up space in a meeting. And visualization can help with this. So you can ask them to do that with their eyes closed, or you can let them make a motivation board. So it is a bit comparable to a vision board, but now they can actually build it up with pictures, with drawings, with things that they want to achieve. And they can hang that in their home, in their car, or they can put it as a screensaver. And by doing that, you help them, remind them why they do this, because exposure therapy can be really hard, especially in the beginning when that road is still very small. It takes a lot of energy, attention, and motivation to get to these exposure and finish them. Another way that can help clients is a motivating message, and to actually record that, and to record that when they are in a quite okay space. Because when do people often start avoiding is at the exact point that the exposure starts or the 10 minutes before. And it is so helpful that on these moments, it is very hard to still reach the rational brain of your client. And clients often also mention that, like, yeah, but in that moment, I can't come up with that healthy way of thinking. I only think that something disastrous will happen and that no way I go there. But when they listen to themselves with like a motivating message or a reminder why they do this, it might help to still have that rational, healthy part of their brain come true. So that's another one that I would recommend. And yeah, I think that was what I wanted to share with you about motivation, about metaphors. And then here we have a list of other content. You can pause it yourself. These are the books that I often recommend to clients. We have Untangle Your Anxiety. We have a workbook based on ACT. And Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. That is a goldie oldie. It's a very old book, but still, I think it can be also interesting for clients to read and to help with motivation. I also would really recommend the ACT Passenger on the Bus video, that is on YouTube. And if you want to learn more about OCD related exposure, this is a very good episode. It is, I think, 90 minutes. And when I listened to it, I was like, yeah, this is actually a great way of summarizing everything that ERP is at the moment. I hope this video was helpful to you. Maybe you can use the roads, the umbrellas, and in the next video we're going to talk much more about actually exposure inspiration. Bye! Thank you so much for watching this video. This is a quick reminder that on my website you can find free therapy forms for all kinds of modalities. They are easy to download in PDF, in Word. They don't have a specialized tag on it, so you can easily use them and also accustom them for your clients. When we are talking about exposure, you can find all these forms on there, both in English and Dutch. And for, I would say, all kinds of anxiety issues, we have the generalized case conceptualization, which is a very easy way of starting your exposure trajectory. Then we have the standard exposure form. There is exposure information that you can just give to your client, which explains exposure therapy based on the current scientific research. And there is an fill-in form about safety behaviors. Then we have more forms specialized for certain specific anxiety issues. For interoceptive exposure, there is an instruction for clients and there is an instruction for therapists. There is a social exposure list with all kind of inspiration. And then there is a whole part for OCD. This is also something, a way of therapy that I really enjoy. So there is a bit more for OCD besides the case conceptualization specified for OCD, the exposure with response prevention form. There is also the OCD cycle visual, the common thinking patterns in OCD, and there is an inspiration form for ERP for therapists. So make sure to check it out. And if you're still here, it would be lovely if you could click the subscribe button or interact with the video, because that will help me also. And thank you so much for being here and hope you have a great day. Bye!